everyone. Welcome to another episode of Glasshouse. We have a lot of stuff on the agenda today, and I suspect that we will cover almost none of it because that's how we go. So today we're running without a guest because
apparently we're also running without sound, according to the chat. No
Try
sound,
now.
that's what they say.
Yes,
Try
sound?
now.
Oh, very quiet.
Hello?
I can fix that.
There, but the volume's very low.
All right. Too sexy for my Twitch. Too sexy for my Twitch.
All right, sound should be a bit higher. I'll kick it up a little more.
We're going to cut that, right?
Reroll the transition start.
Like silence. Okay, hopefully the sound is working. So hello, everyone. And today we have a full agenda. We've got quite a lot to go through. We are unlikely to get through much of it because that's just how we roll. We've got, Silas, Jags, and Dave with us today. Unfortunately, our guest could not make it, and we absolutely did invite someone, and we did not forget. Those are rumors, and they are false, and it is defamatory to say that. Just in case anyone might think that, not true. Anyway, so there's a bunch of cool stuff to go over. For example, the US has done a secret, and we know that because they are telling everyone. That is, that's the usual way that you know that there's been a successful covert operation. There's with the Roe v. Wade thing, there's a cyber angle, which is the privacy and security aspect of life where, your phone stitches out literally everything you do, and also some very normal parts of life are now illegal, and that is going to be very interesting. And I mean, terrible. Dave has included a link to a video that no one has watched but himself because it's about policy. So we'll probably be skipping that one.
This is a cyber policy video podcast, right? Like that is what we do.
That's what we say to get you to come.
Oh,
that's how we lure you in with the bait and switch. Sure, Dave, we'll talk about policy.
I've been bamboozled.
Yeah. Let's see. There's some, I don't know, people have just put in links and short summary notes themselves. But anyway, I think we should start off by talking about the US and the approach to secrecy, because I know I've made the joke before, but it's very, very true. Basically, whenever the US has done something successful and it's secret, it's in the papers the day afterwards. That's just how it works.
That takes an immense amount of faith in the reporters, which really bugs me in cases like this. Not because I have anything in particular against these reporters, but rather you start to see this one iffy story comes out, and then you have 3 follow-on reports of people saying, yeah, somebody whispered the same thing at me at a bar in DC, and they're totally legit. And it's okay, what we're talking about is not something small. I'm not in a position to talk about the legality of it. I'm pretty sure it's against policy at the very least, but you're also talking about something that has the potential to kind of escalate this conflict and at least paint us in a much different light than just, hey, we're kind of supplying you with weapons. Or instead, you're saying Ukraine is a full-on proxy army and we're literally marking targets.
I'm gonna push back against that because I think it's being blown out of proportion to a degree because it's being phrased in fairly abstract ways. So I think that, for example, Ukraine has got a very good idea of who is on their territory, particularly given the limited OPSEC and the advanced ELINT capabilities that they have inside their own territory, plus whatever other surveillance capabilities they have. I don't think that they are blind, except that the US is telling them P.S., this is what's happening in, a village 100 meters in front of your front line. Like, so I'm fairly sure that they have robust capabilities of their own. I think that where it probably the US steps up is either in sort of confirmations of things where like Ukraine would be like, hey, we're seeing like, you know, the sort of clustering that we would expect if there's a really high ranking senior officer. We believe that there might be a general so-and-so in this area. What do you think? And you should be like, I don't know. And you know, I think it's more like that rather than like, okay, here's what you need to do, like grid coordinate.
That's fine. It's just, it's not what these articles are claiming in a sense. And I don't have a problem with the idea being put out there.
Wait, are these articles in the New York Times?
New York Times, Washington Post.
WSJ one, Wall
So
Street Journal.
The thing that bothers me about it is the thing is like if it was something that was done and there was reasons for it, having it come out in these like piecemeal broken stories is just something that further enables Russian narratives on these things, that like in the kind of like, you know, bullshit ideas that, you know, NATO is expanding to eventually usurp Putin. Like,
yeah.
Like, but having these types of things and creating that illusion of like the US proxy warring this over, like that's just like fodder for their news machines.
At the end of the day, they're gonna use their own, you know, they're gonna say whatever the fuck they want to say. Like, I don't know that we need to tone police on the basis of that. I'm just dismayed at how much hay really big news outlets continue to make out of the anonymous source. And like we know in our industry, the anonymous source can be like a, you know, David Sanger's buddy, who he's known forever, who leaks some stuff all the time, anonymous source, who usually doesn't understand much about cyber, but has some pretty good insights, or like the Jordan Robertson anonymous source, where it's like, that anonymous source was my friend who says that that's not what they said. You know what I mean? Like that, it's that level of disconnect. So seeing it just continue to like build up and be echoed and be fed, it's disappointing. Like, I don't think this is someone's signaling effort. At you know, best case scenario, it's someone's ultimate like hubris making the you know, the worst of the situation, or somebody just fucking making something up. I mean, like, I like these reporters. I'm not saying that they would do something like that. I'm just saying that in that game of telephone, a lot of stuff, you know, happens and gets distorted. We all know that.
I like what Neuter Blind said in the chat. I like what was said in the chat, which is that it's irresponsible reporting.
Yeah, no, like I agree with that. Like, I think that there's a lot of nuance that's getting lost with the like, you know, can you confirm that we gave intelligence? Yes. And then it's like, okay, so US is directing, you know, the Ukraine artillery strikes against generals. You know, like things sort of, they escalate really quickly in the retelling by, first of all, like, you know, going to a generalization and then going to like the broadest possible application of that. So yeah, like I think, and to speak to the point I think Silas was making is, it's probably better in terms of narrative that there's at least someone goes over what's going to be released and then they release like the right things to make sure that everyone knows, you know, exactly what we want them to think happened, rather than allowing. So for example, they should be saying like, you know, the US has been supplying general intelligence on, I don't know, like weather systems to Ukraine, you know, rather than leaving it to just random whomever, like they say whatever they sort of think they understand and letting it get put together somewhere else. Like there should at least, like if you're going to lay that out, make sure that the correct information is out.
Well, so you're saying Biden should be tweeting, right? Like, is that what I'm hearing?
Totally.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, like where's the like president 46 or whatever, you know? He should have a Twitter account.
I don't even know if he sends a single tweet.
I think more thing on the
we should give him Trump's old account. That would be fucking perfect.
In the like interesting signaling and stuff, and actual stuff that like people have said and is being reported in how they said it. There was that CyberScoop article. I pasted the link on there. where Nakasone is talking about CyberCommand hunting forward and basically like how well CyberCommand, I think in particular CNMF, is doing like actually interfacing with private industry. I think it's a really interesting article. Like mostly because like, look, I'm not going to read interdepartmental butting of heads or anything of the sort, but like when you talk about CyberCommand having successful relationships with the private sector that actually get shit done, I feel like the only person you're really competing with as far as the US government goes is like either NSA Collaboration Center or CISA. And, you know, God knows what's happening in NSA CCC, but like this is a very different article to what we hear coming out of CISA, where it's like, we're all buddies, everybody's, you know, patting each other on the back, like what wonderful collaboration, what wonderful information sharing. And you're like, we don't know what you did at the table other than you seem to have brought the table, right? Like it's just a completely different tone for like collab.
One of them was lying down and getting a massage from CISA. It ended happily.
I wouldn't, I wouldn't go that far. I don't know about happiness being involved in any way. I would just say, you know, we're seeing competing models of what collaboration could look like. And I'm not trying to turn this into an indictment of CISA. I'm just really curious about the different mentalities and philosophies that are going into what does it look like when the public sector and the private sector share a table, no matter who paid for the table, and what that brings. Because that's a conversation we tend to have in private and in very disgruntled tones. It's like, it's wonderful that the government has finally showed up. Did they bring anything? Like, what kind of potluck are we in if like we're all bringing food and they're just kind of like eating it and telling us?
They're the ones that were in elementary school that were like, don't worry, fam, I'll bring the cups.
Right.
Like, oh man, this potluck is saved with you bringing a pack of red Solo cups and an opened bag, and it's just a sleeve.
Pong balls, like just the Solo cups. You know, the ping pong balls were classified. So it's just tough, man. Like, I think that that's a conversation that we need to have more broadly, more like there have been so many bullshit, stupid conference talks about information sharing they don't even include the public sector. Like, just like, oh, information sharing is going to save the world. You're like, I'm sorry. We have more information than we know what to do with. So what are we talking about here? Like, are we talking about you doing nicer and
well, hold on. So the thing is though, is I've seen this conversation before, and I have my like model to like in my head to describe this, and it basically goes like, we begin initial collaboration, and there's the like, hey, like, wanted to pass this, like this is relevant to like, you know, alert you guys just put out, and then it's like, oh, we need to do this faster. And so then it's like, okay, well, let's build something. And then we build Sticks and Taxi. And then everybody's like, fuck this noise.
Yeah.
And then like the sharing falls away. And then we're like, hey, got this idea. We should share with each other.
You know what we should do though? We should speed it up. I don't believe with a protocol so that we could automate this.
I don't have a problem with Sticks Taxi. I mean, I have a million problems with Sticks Taxi, but it's not the protocol. It's just, hey, we built the protocol. You know how you said you were going to give us all this shit? Give us all this shit. And now we're going to share it with 500 lawyers for a bunch of companies. So not only did we introduce all the liability that comes with talking to the government, we're also going to introduce all the friction and liability that comes with like talking to the GM/associate counsel of Microsoft, who's like in the threat intel channel, and like other, you're like, guys, this is not how we work. Like, I don't talk, my lawyers are awesome, and I don't talk to them unless I have to. They're busy, and I don't want them to scrutinize the things that I do unless, you know, it's worth their time, their very lucrative time. Like, why are we creating chats and Slacks full of the counsels of every one of these fucking companies? Anytime you have to talk to a lawyer at any other company, even if they're casually introduced into the email thread, that is the end of any productive sharing. That is it. Like, it's why, like, when you talk to the, you know, you talk to the big companies, when somebody doesn't want to do something for you, they CC their lawyer and just drop off. And that's all the signal you need, right? So what does it mean when the government is just coordinating giant chat rooms of lawyers? Like, what did we do this for?
So I think like one of the interesting things is that Dave always brings it up. It's the UK's Industry 100 approach. Like the way that they've managed to get actual cooperation or a partnership between the private and the public sector, or a sort of a PPP, one might say. The way that they do it is they have a contract that allows, so, okay, the basic idea is they're taking people from private sector and they're putting them into operations and projects run by the civil services. And that allows them to, work on a white paper that's going to be released by the government, or, work an incident that is huge and needs to be managed, and, getting some of the skill transfer and information stuff. And the way that that's done includes having a contract that basically says, for this period of time, you're released from your employment and you are now technically a civil servant, until Thursday when you get back.
Yeah, you're being seconded into the government op, which, like, look, you're talking about acknowledging that there are things in the private sector the government needs, wants, and can't do by themselves, which in itself is a feat here.
That's a big step.
B, they're bringing them into their house, which in the UK is much easier. Like, they're much more reasonable. They understand what they're doing. Look, there's a reason NCSE paid all that money to get an office in the middle of London, right next to Victoria Station, so that we can all casually show up and have conversations and share. Like, no, they didn't say, oh, I'm sure all of you will get to Cheltenham on your own dime and just make it your mission to share stuff with us for free.
But the thing is even beyond just, even if like the US couldn't do an Industry 100 because, say it's a geographic thing, the least they could do is throw money at the problem and continue that, but throw money at things like projects and sponsor like open source projects and projects that are doing really good work, instead of allowing them to sometimes either die off once somebody moves on from the project, or it gets absorbed into Microsoft.
Right. So Fast Track was the only thing they had that was actually good at getting money into projects, and they've never had another version of it. Once March was done, that was it. It's also, wow, this was really successful.
It's also not accessible. It's also just not accessible. And I mean, personal bias on this one, because if I could get CISA to sponsor now a repository I run, that would be fantastic. It would be nice to be able to expand out a little more, and I could, but also something just for the longevity of it. But in order to do the process, I've got to wade through a mountain of complicated people. I went to the CISA website for their thing about funding. Page didn't load. And so clearly the solution is I need to find lawyers and pay those lawyers to do it.
No, you need to pitch them on hosting their website. No, look, I'm with you, Silas, in the sense that you're also talking about a project that's too small for them to care, right? Everything is too small unless it's in the hundreds of millions and billions and trillions. But the stuff that we need doesn't rise up to that level, but it also isn't small. Something that I try to talk about with government folks is I can't buy you a burger without it being a problem, but I can run you a retro hunt. Do you know how much that shit costs? Thank God our companies are so cool with us using our resources however we see fit. But at the end of the day, where is the virus total enterprise, passive total, domain tools accounts, all the shit that would enable people to collaborate with the government and actually empower them to do so without them having to bring gifts from home and from work. We travel on our own dime. You show up there for 6 days, you spend all this fucking money giving them stuff. And then the saddest part of it is you don't even walk away with a letter saying thank you for your service. It's just we'll get back to you if and when and maybe and whatever. So I like seeing bringing it full circle. I like seeing this CyberCommand article because CNMF are the only people that you actually see at conferences with their laptops, and they're trying to help. And they might, at the end of the day, they may very well say look, I can't share anything on that, but let's build a tool together and do this thing. I watched those guys pull out a laptop and start coding some shit to
Dude, they were hacking out YAR rules with us at one point. That's fucking legit. And even if it's there's no special magic sauce to that. There's no clearance protection. It's, hey man, here's a shitty piece of malware that I just pulled off VT. You want to tear it up with me? Like, and getting in the trenches together, like, yeah.
I'm just
All
saying.
right, you guys are super close to this problem. That's what I'm sensing.
Yeah,
And you're actually talking about like 4 things at once. One, there's a huge, like there was like a 10-year drought for public-private partnership. And so now, yeah, there's someone's pouring a hose on it. Good things are happening, but everyone's so thirsty for it that it's like, it's almost like hard to receive sometimes, right? And you're always like, why don't we have more? And then you're talking about, can CISA be technical? That's a huge issue, right? Like, can CISA be technical? It's a question because they can be an open door. They can be the front door to government. There's a lot of coordination they can do. At a certain point, if they can't be technical, how far can they really go? Is a real issue. And like, you have like a bunch of stuff. You're wrapping it all together in a big pile, and some of it's amazing stuff, right? Like on how to split this policy stuff up. But I do want you to separate it into like issues.
They don't separate it though. Like so that's the issue, Dave. It's like I want to separate it, but when we talk to CISA or anybody, any of these orgs, those are not separate questions. Like, I have to talk to the same people, whether it's like I have an incident or I need some help, or can you share some data with me, or who do I hand this to, or could you help me fund this project? So it's like, and it means that, like, for example, like I know people who do CISA partnership who are just awesome people to talk to, who are like gonna try to help you no matter what. They're not gonna pull out a laptop and write a YAR rule for you because that's not their skill set. But like, I know I can call John Halper and be like, John, this is going on, find me the right person, help me. And like, John is gonna kill himself until he figures it out. And that's not your technical person. How do I reach CISA technical people wherever they are? Right? Like, I know a couple just because like I've dug in enough and I'm, you know, we've collaborated on stuff, and like, I really want CISA to succeed. I really want CISA to succeed. So like, for all the joking, I really want CISA to succeed. But like, I don't know their threat hunting team. I don't know who their IR people are. I've never collaborated with them. They've never asked me questions. I've never been able to ask them any questions. You know, like, I don't know where they exist. This is a pretty small industry. We're all on Twitter. Everyone shares. Where are they? Like, why are they mole people?
I also want to point out, just also knowing like what are the things that they need help with as well, and ways that we can support them, because they're in sometimes a really frontline position as well. And like, yeah, and we want them to succeed. So in order to make that happen, like, the private industry wants to help and they want to make it better. It's like the cards are all stacking towards their favor. It's just picking them up and running with them.
We've kind of beaten this dead horse for like 10 minutes, so like we don't have to keep going on it. All I'm saying,
I mean, actually, the metric of your frustration is really valuable to people like me who are a little bit outside that industry. So straight up,
remember what Silas just said about money and about projects, and remember what I just said about subscription services, and basically like the implicit pro bono aspect of public-private partnerships that we're all eating the cost for. And then remember like what happened last week with CISA justifying its $3 billion budget. You know, like that, I don't know where that money's going. I have no clue. I'm assuming
this is a serious word. I mean, at some level, coordination is not cooperation, right? So you can straight up coordinate the hell out of the whole industry and not get value for your money. And that's where we're in danger right now. It's kind of what I'm hearing. It's like, if we're not actually, if we know where everyone is and we still don't march in lockstep, it doesn't really matter that the $3 billion got added to the bottom line, is where I'm hearing you guys.
I wish I could remind, like, at every like congressional hearing and all these things and anything to do with CISA, but also like any of these other like NSA, CCC, whatever, is like private partnerships have existed for a long time and they work incredibly well. So you actually have to make the case for what makes a public-private partnership worth a damn. Because just because like, if you remove the public sector out of it, doesn't mean that we all go, well, I guess I can't talk to DigitalOcean anymore. Like, it's like, no, I'm gonna go hit up my friends. Like, you need to make the case for public-private partnerships in contrast to private-private partnerships.
There are existing partnerships, and the public sector has to make the case for why they should be allowed to join. or set up a parallel one is what I'm hearing. Like
What?
they're on their own, and if they want to join, they need to bring something other than the like the solo cups.
Other than bring the ping pong balls, at least.
At least bring your VirusTotal API key. Like, if you're not bringing that, what are you bringing?
50 bucks for the keg deposit. Is it too much to ask?
I mean, I will be just straight up honest. I think a sign of maturity in this space is the niceness aspect, the saying thank you part. And I'm not saying that CISA doesn't make every effort to do that, because I haven't interacted with them in that way. But, you know, when you hear people like a stupid coin goes a long way. I don't know why that is. Like, it does.
Yeah, I'm like looking for my like CNMF coins and like whatever. Like
it does. It's just weird, and it is also about like getting the lawyers out of the system. Like, I think we focus too much on liability protection and not enough on what do we do if we just don't make it an issue.
I mean, if we're talking about liability, shouldn't it be precisely the government's project before trying to put everybody in the room to say, look, these are the liability protections, now back off and bring me your technical people? Like, that's what I want.
Well, the reason the lawyers are also involved is their job is policy projection, which is how like Microsoft and Google and everyone else do power projection. Like, you're a big company, you sort of project, you want to do regulatory capture. That's like a thing you do. That's your job mission, right? So like, they're in there because that's their job, like, to do regulatory capture, to make sure these things are moved in a certain direction. And it's not a sign of strength necessarily on the government's part. It's not that they wanted to have a bunch of lawyers, you know, in the stream, perhaps.
I want to know if they can tell the difference.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they probably watch the stream after I send it to them in email after the stream, so I'm sure they'll tell you later.
Friends, I'm like losing what few friends I had in DC.
We'll start tagging like the title for this one, like CISA edition.
They're gonna think it's been a leaked, you know, Q&A session. While we're on the subject of not being able to tell the difference, Silas, would you like to talk about the Winnti thing?
My God, I think I've waited my entire life for you to say those words to me. Yes, I want to talk about the Winnti thing. Holy shit, man.
Edition, guys.
Just before we get into that, if I could completely redirect the conversation somewhere else, Silence will get back to you later.
All right, so this week, like eason, however it's pronounced, like
thing an R.
Yeah, whatever their name is. So they put out the report, like this report on like honestly, it kind of tried to be this like roundup of the Winnti group, but clearly, and I'm sorry to say this, like, and nothing against any of the researchers who wrote it personally, Jesus fucking Christ, guys. We have consistently for years on Twitter said, stop calling Winnti a group. It's not a group. And the other thing is, as well, is some of the things that were missed are so unacceptable of misses. The thing is like, yes, we called it as Winnti for years as a malware, like, but it is not a group. It's not a unique tool. It's distributed.
So,
like,
wait, Silas, like, because I'm staring at Dave's glossy eyes over here and his beautiful tan. Could you
Is
like
this related to the Cobalt Strike group?
all right. So I really like the Winnti group, and I followed like their that hurts.
It got you. What happened?
I got myself in. But hold on.
pressure because there's decades here.
You'd have to put $1 in the fucking jar every time you say it wrong, man.
But so here's right.
Minute synopsis, Silas. Go.
All right. So this group started out doing at least what we know is they started out doing like game hacking. They were breaking into like Asian-based game companies, like South Korean ones, stealing their code, signing certs. And in one case, it also looked like they pushed out their malware as like a game update, running like a supply chain attack. When I first looked at them, in 2013 or something, like I sinkhole a bunch of their domains. For the TREADSTONE authors, if you're watching this, like, sorry, not sorry. And all of the infected systems that I was seeing were inconsistent with a nation state actor. They were residential IP addresses. So they looked like an e-crime group, but the stealing of SSL certificates, like it was a weird thing. And we started seeing those certificates pop up in other targeted intrusion attacks from potentially related groups. And like over the years, like their malware kind of expanded out further. And it actually got really interesting and sophisticated, and it's super cool. I'm never going to pretend to be an expert on it. There's a couple of people who I know who are truly inspirations to me to be a better reverse engineer. But anyways, so the malware's kind of continued and grown. I would actually call it parallel, if not in some cases better than Cobalt Strike in terms of functionality, except for the memory leak. And again, if this ever gets to the authors of TREADSTONE, you've got to stop using game libraries for like memory allocation stuff. Like that's not going to fix it, bro. So after they did like game hacking stuff, they started shifting into the targeted stuff in like 2014, 15, like at least what we were seeing publicly in a lot of stuff as well, like hitting pharma companies. And they've kind of like continued on over the years, like still doing targeted intrusion stuff. There's still rumors of game hacks every now and then. But in like 2020, maybe 2019, FBI puts out an indictment on them where they detail them out. They also detail like that the malware itself was originally called by the actors TREADSTONE. And like some of the other details about it are that it uses Win license to protect the panel so that you can only run it on one system. And my standing assessment on it is that Winnti is a privately sold malware toolkit. So the thing is at one point, it may have been a single group using it. Over the years, it has likely been sold to others and being used kind of like Cobalt Strike. And so the reason that we're seeing
kind of like NSO group is what you're really saying, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely. And even like some of the NSOs, like the stuff that made their malware platform really, really sophisticated. There's even like, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation between the tradecraft proliferation there, but like the developers of TREADSTONE / Winnti, they knew their shit. And they looked and built features like, you know, host pivoting and pivoting through other infections and things like that. Like,
I've always been like, as an offensive person, really impressed with them. You know, one thing that I don't think you've mentioned is their firmware infection. How many teams do firmware infection? Like, how common is that?
Yeah, the skeleton key stuff, like very few, or maybe more. But
I
like,
don't. Yeah, I mean, we're not looking for it that much. So the answer is between 1 and a million.
Mhm.
But like, they're the only ones I know about. And you know, in terms of like, and maybe there's 2, right? Like,
So report, like I just kind of want to bring a little breath to the conversation as far as what, like, I don't know very much about Chinese ops. I'm definitely not an expert in that by any stretch of the imagination. But there was a great shadow server report back in the day, the digital quartermaster one. That was like, it was I think it was Ned and some other folks, like they were talking about, you know, how exploits proliferate across these different groups and hypothesizing about, you know, who is, you know, doing the sharing and sort of systemic sharing between the different groups that we associated in these clusters. And then like I fast forward a couple of, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years, and then you start seeing like really interesting reports about how PlugX and its variants proliferate. Like it's not open source, but it is distributed among different Chinese groups. And then ShadowPad comes around, and then all of a sudden it becomes like the tool du jour among specific Chinese groups with different variants between these groups, but it's not open source. So like there does seem to be like an interesting services sector within China for these different APTs with their respective variations, but it's closed source and it's presumably paid for.
I would say it's definitely paid for, and I would actually compare it probably to a rumored sales catalog that was published privately to folks in from a 3-letter agency that got leaked by the defector.
Do they have any mobile capability that we know about?
Well, the one thing that would come to mind is the Uyghur targeting with the exploits from the Tianfu Cup, but someone forgot to push the payloads, I believe. Am I wrong?
Why would we link that to this NTI TREADSTONE team?
No.
So this is
giant cluster of Chinese shit. Like,
yeah, I mean, we know that there are some of those capabilities there, and we've seen them used. The thing also with, and like Jax, to your point, with the especially the cyber quartermaster stuff, like that is when like timing range, like, and I know I'm wrong, but that's when I started seeing the real proliferation of that and seeing it, and when I kind of see the biggest push out of the tool set being used by others as well, and I think that like because of exactly this, like I think there is some type of private commercial sector that's not publicly known. And I think that because of that, the existence of that type of thing where we saw PlugX being used basically by everyone and TREADSTONE, Winnti being used by everyone, it's blurred the attribution lines so dramatically that it, like, for a long time, people were like, oh, the Winnti malware, like, clearly this is the Winnti group / APT41. And that bubble and cluster has really gotten away from a lot of folks, I think.
That's fascinating. I mean, is it possible the market in China is just so huge that they don't really have to sell it overseas?
It may not be something they could sell overseas. There's many different laws. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but if it's like a low level capability, like say an NSO group level capability, you know, China could use it also for power projection the way Israel does.
Wait, are you calling NSO a low level capability? Because I say that not with any kind of jading, but actually because that's your space more than mine, and I'm really curious how you classify it.
I mean, I would say NSO group is probably medium, right? Like I know that they they have a really good exploit team that wrote like 2 really good exploits. I just think that that's not how you define high level functionality with this in this space. If that makes sense.
The other thing is the target sets that they're going after are more towards like an individual or something similar. It's not a like, let's go after a country and then you sort of start thinking about like, how are we going to go after this agency and building capability for that, as opposed to just like in general, how do we go after like a person, particularly one who doesn't have great counterintelligence capabilities. But I wanted to get back on the Chinese market briefly, because there's a there's a type of ecosystem that exists in China that is slightly different from what we have in the West, which is where there are closed source things that have essentially SDKs and documentation that get shared around as if it was open source. Like if you think about it, like libz is open source, but you don't actually need the source code to libz. You could have like a .so and the header file and go with that. Like it's not going to impede your ability to develop something against libz. Like you could still have that functionality provided you know how to use it and you have the thing that you need to link against. Mm-hmm. So they have something like that where things get shared around, where you will have like, as I said, it ends up being sort of SDK where it's like, you know, you put your code here, you put these things there, you run like this make file, and the thing that you get at the end works. And like that'll get shared around freely because someone will have gone to the effort of making it and they just want to promote the fact that they've made it to other people, because that's how they get you know, their social credit and stuff. So
some of that, like just to kind of substantiate there's definitely a different sharing mechanism, right? Like this isn't hacking team point and click, like we just gave you the tools and fuck off. Like the reason I put it that way is you know, you see certain groups out of certain regions that have changed PlugX in some ways and continue to use it, even though it gets updated and other parts are using this totally different, like newer version of. So like you can definitely, were you so inclined, which I am not, you could definitely even keep track of the folks using the same malware just by variations in versioning.
Different blades and stuff.
And that was, I mean, that's how, that is a big thing with PlugX as well, is tracking those variants as well, because there are a lot of minor details and changes of it. And I think one of the things that it speaks a lot to is, especially when, especially for some of the Western threat intel that's being produced, a lot of times we're modeling it based on what we know around us and on Western centric model, or Yes, West, like Western centric models of what we believe the world works. Like we have friends who do pen testing, and it's like, oh, well, they post all their shit to GitHub, but that's not everywhere, and it blinds you when you think that way as well.
That sort of that mirror imaging fallacy that like we just tend to make. Like the amusing thing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine was how one of the fallacies was believing that the Russians actually trained. So they had all these great technical tools, and the assumption was that they trained on using the tools, right? Because that's what you do if you have it. Like if you're a military and you've got like a really cool like electronic warfare tool, you train on using it, and then you train on using it in combined arms warfare, and you train everyone to know like that's just a thing that you do. But they didn't, by all apparent evidence. So yeah, like it's like even really basic things can end up like being fundamentally wrong if you mirror image. And I think particularly when it comes to how sharing is done in different, I'm going to say ecosystems rather than cultures, but like there's going to be a type of ecosystem, like we have an idea of the Russian one, and it's not exactly like the one that we have in.
It's super, super different. Like, and I think that's why, like, I've personally avoided shops that try to do threat intel by regions and countries, just because I don't like being limited that way. But I do understand places that kind of follow that governmentally model of like, this is the China desk, because there is definitely some level of variation. Now, you pigeonhole people that way, they're going to try to see everything the way they do. For me, what broke some of those assumptions regarding China, again, very unfamiliar space for me, was, I mean, for a blink, I got to work with one of the most like brilliant analysts when it comes to this Chinese stuff, which is Priscilla Moriucci, who is now at Apple, I think. And she, she came from NSA, and she would just sit down and be like, okay, this is what the MSS like looks like. And then you see these like mirror offices, and they each have these offices that do these things. So it's like, it's not like the FBI where like, you're not going to have FBI Georgia and FBI, well, actually GBI Georgia, and then FBI Alabama or whatever have their own cyber office that does this, that, and the other, and these types of targeting. And like the Chinese are just organized differently. And that's the first time it started to make sense. Like, oh, why do we run into 4 Chinese APT teams within the same target tripping over each other? Like, why do we run into different versions of the same tools being used in the same way? Like, there's definitely an aspect of it where it's like the APT space is double and triple filled, with just overpopulated with actors trying to get similar or different things within the same target space when it comes to the Chinese, in a way that like we kind of see with the Russians, but we don't quite see with the Russians. Like, yeah, APT 29, 28 might trip over each other, but like there aren't 7 APT 29s and 12 APT 28s, and they're all fucking dancing and choreographing. It's just different.
That sounds actually like a bureaucratic problem in a way, that there's been a spread of sort of responsibility over cyber, and then everyone's just doing fiefdom building, and so you'll get like different groups who have like a different manager who's trying to get promoted or whatever, and therefore like they will like he'll be out there trying to get like more headcount, more budget by doing more operations. And the guy across the hall is doing the same thing. And like, there's only so many companies that produce like, I don't know, like drones. Like that you can't
ever hurt anybody. Process only makes things better. Buy greenhouse.
Well, I mean, like the thing is, bureaucracy, if you do it really well, is fucking amazing. But yeah, like it has its own pathologies. I wonder if there's like an interesting law, like, how the systems resemble the organization that developed them, right? That's a software rule, but where, modules have the same boundaries as the different groups working on those modules will have. So if someone writes something, their API will be basically, the interface will be where they speak to someone else about doing something. That's going to be, I think, how it's designed.
Yes, you see it in the US a lot more than anywhere else. and I mean, I should say Five Eyes, but like you definitely see organizational jumping off points, and then you also see kind of the legal requirements and whatnot baked into the software. But the prerequisite for that is a structured society, a structured approach to these things, right? Like, I don't think that the Russians or the Chinese approach software in that way. Especially, you know, the Russians have been so used to just kind of like, well, you know, I'll just break this protection and use this thing however the fuck I want to use it and move on. Versus like when you look at how Five Eyes has structured their malware production pipeline, you may as well have gotten some like Google software architects to like build a whole API.
Probably did, to be honest.
You know, APIs and a distributed system, and like, how is this going to feed other people, and how is somebody who read the Mythical Month like in the other side of the planet going to contribute to this, and what if they leave, and like institutional memory baked into the system, which is why like when there's an OPSEC failure, it's a cascading OPSEC failure over an entire system. But it also, for the most part, means that you can keep a high level, a high bar for everything because it's been systematized, even if, you know, you constantly have a rotation of like great people leaving to start stupid companies, and like, you know, sorry, Dave, and new idiots coming in and sort of being trained up and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, so like, I mean, the thing is, systems naturally, they reflect the organization that developed it. That's just, like, it's basically an innate law of like how things work. Like, you can't really do it another way. My question is sort of not necessarily at the software level, but rather at the way that like campaigns end up going. So like, do campaigns end up like being a representation of the organization that is running that campaign? Throwing it out there.
There's too much there. We're dealing in too much vagary, to be perfectly frank, because we're dealing with too many countries, too many different types of operations, too many different types of organizations. Like, just to talk about it on that front, like, I think some of the hardest stuff to track for some folks has been like Black Cube and Indian like contractors and things like that, where you have a big cloud of interests being run within a single like operations group. Like, if the five of us decided we're starting a hacking team, and five being, you know, the extra Silas Cutler that does the OBS in the screen, we're going to run a hacking team, and we're going to take 7 different customers, and one of them is like, oh, we got to go steal the formula for Coca-Cola. The other one cares about like potential counterterrorism in Pakistan. The other one cares about, you know, whatever, manufacturing in China. But for us,
some fucking individual,
for us, it's one giant fucking cluster of activity, and nobody tells you like, this is customer number 1 versus 2 versus 3. So like, you look at some of the most interesting ops are like Wild Neutron, which I think is the first time that folks really dealt with what looked like a mercenary group. And there was so much confusion around it, because you're like, one day they care about M&A, and the next day they care about like, they are actually going after what looked like counterterrorism targets, but then they don't do any traditional like, you know, government de-espionage. Like, they're not going after any like Ministry of Foreign Affairs or embassies or anything like that, or like actual government agency. Like, it was a mess, but not if you take a step back and look at it as like, okay, these dudes are for hire, right? And you get a similar situation with like your Beltroxes of the world, where you're just like, fuck, I don't know what campaign they were going after, but it's the same cluster of activity.
I mean, APG3 was the same way, like Gothic Panda, Perpy Crew, like UPS, like they would do these massive campaigns where it would just broad ranging targets. They get access, persist, then they do nothing. And about a month or two later, like they'd roll through on like a day and, you know, complete their ops and then just move on. And they were going target by target. And there was always the consistent themes, but there was variation in it over time.
Let me flag something, guys. We are at like 10-minute mark, more or less. I know there were topics about like the sort of third rail horrendous issue, Roe v. Wade in the States, some other things that we haven't covered. So I wanted to kind of open the space instead of just complacently talking about our wonderful APT.
Yeah, and another inside baseball thing that we really need to cover. Yeah, I was going to bring it up, but I also think that the makeup of this group makes us perhaps not completely ideal. And in a way, what I'd like to do is like to hold off for an actual targeted, focused discussion.
We tried to get Ava here for like maybe next week, because that would be, she'd be amazing. And like maybe other folks would like to join as well. It doesn't have to be the four of us like every time. I will say as prep work, John Oliver had a piece about data brokers last week or the week before, very prescient, that I would just emphasize for folks that are not as familiar with what the horrorscape of data brokerage is and like ads data for sale and targeting, which I think is like an important part of this conversation, because a lot of stuff is being put out as like, well, if you don't use a period tracking app, then whatever. It's like, no. The amount of data that's out there, like even for those of us that just live with folks who may have to deal with the consequences of this, like the spread of it, like these dark profiles and things that, we tend to be a little more excited about in the threat intel space because we tend to just use it for tracking, or somebody might give us great info on. Now we're talking about its possible weaponization and how it might be used in horrendous ways. So like, do take other on that.
Like there's all sorts of stuff. Like you can buy DNS logs along with your NetFlow stuff.
There's fundamentally though a difference between things like DNS logs and many of the other capabilities that are out there to do really horrendous, terrible things. And there's things that I see a lot of this building out that are truly sinister things, and we've started to see some of those things happening. And Juan, your point about the shadow profiling and things that are going on, for us, like the analytic standards that we adhere to are very high. We routinely, for when we're conducting and doing attribution of cases, we do very careful work on it. That type of standard is less often done when the objective is simply to hurt people, and there's also a financial motivation for you to
even just marketing to people. Like, I mean, I think that's the part I don't think even us in this room understand it as granularly as we should. Like, it started with like, you have Shoshana Zuboff with her great work about like surveillance capitalism, which is, I think, a seminal book as far as like what the 21st century hellscape is. But like, look, anyone here who thinks that they understand the granularity of ad tracking data, you don't. I don't. Like, it is truly horrifying, and it is much cheaper and easier to come to than anyone realizes. And normally it's like, oh, I'm just going to sell Instagram ads for my little shop that sells pens. Fantastic. But like, no. and that's even, we're horrified at Instagram and Facebook, and they are the like public facing buttoned up suit and tie version of that shit. And they're definitely not the other sources that everybody else is buying. And like, Hercor said in the comments, like, there are entire TI companies built on this. There are even worse companies built on this that you just don't understand, whether it's for like, tracking people down to get them to pay their fucking loans, or to target them for voter whatever, or even to just target them in order to give them payday loans and like entrap them in financial slavery until the end of fucking time. Like,
I mean, look at the repo industry, where they have people driving around with the same license plate reading technology as police officers, hunting people and building these massive location databases of things. Like,
it's the other way around. The police have repo technology, which is
correct. Because and the thing is, and I'll give a huge shout out here to one of the legal folks and privacy folks that I have an unbelievable amount of respect for, and it's Winnti Merrill. And she's often talked about responsibly collecting data and not collecting data just for the data collection's sake, because too often people forget that when you collect the data, you do have an onus then to protect it. So
yeah, they don't really respect it. One of the things that actually gets missed is that part of the, like, it might have changed now, but at least for a very, very long time. Part of the culture in Silicon Valley was that when you switch jobs, you bring data with you. That's just kind of like a thing that you do, right? So, you know, if you were working on like a whole bunch of technology that collected a whole bunch of data that you thought was useful, and then you got hired doing a similar job at another place, you would bring the data with you so you could keep working on it, because that's just what you do. And like that sort of thing started leaking out when there was various scandals that came up, and there would be CEOs writing on Hacker News with like, what are you talking about? Everyone does that. That's normal. That's like,
I mean,
that's how everyone, like, what do you, like,
Listen,
why are you outraged?
because in the TI space, like the data that we produce is essentially the product that we're making. So like the, you know, for us, it's never been it's often not a source code issue where you're like walking out with your tools. It's more like you're walking out with indicators and whatever, and you try to kind of firewall that stuff. But there were also a lot of TI companies that would hire straight out of government, try to use the, you know, the information while it was valuable, et cetera, et cetera. I put the video up for this thing. I think it's particularly poignant in that the way John Oliver's going about this thing is basically they ran an ad campaign around the Senate and like Congress for like a week, and like they can literally identify down to like what are likely 4 senators that clicked on this, that, and the other. So like just to understand the level of granularity, and like I said, I don't think anyone here really gets it. I don't. And we do well to get much more familiar with this stuff. Like if there's one takeaway of homework for next week, is spend some time on data brokers and just the amount of shit that's there.
One thing I'd throw up is that sex workers have actually been dealing with this for a while, because it's a threat that they face, and they've had to, you know, they've had to deal with basically people doing the same sort of thing, only targeting them rather than just all women. And so yeah, like there's actually a lot of institutional knowledge which is going to cross over, and I find that both heartening and also terrible that it has to exist.
For more information in that space, Love and Mayhem on Twitter has put out some really important resources as well, and given some unbelievably good talks on the topic, and definitely also a recommended thing to check out.
Please post links, because I haven't seen that. I'd love to. I wanted to say we have a minute left, and we've been starting to have a conversation internally about how often we should continue to do these calls. I mean, it's not like it's ultra taxing, and we have a you know, sort of revolving group, but we went into like crazy every week mode, mostly over the Ukraine thing. And I think these conversations are fun, but we're trying to figure out kind of what a healthy cadence is, since, you know, the war and every other horror is not going to end anytime soon. The other thing that I wanted to kind of open up for question with the folks in the, not just in the chat, but Twitter, everywhere else, is like, this is like a revolving door of folks with guests. We'd love to have more guests. It's actually quite hard to coordinate. And as you saw with, you know, for example, with Kim Sutter, we also want to give them the right stage and not just let them kind of be a fly in the wall, right? Like we want to be able to, they have amazing stuff to offer, and we want them to provide as much as they can and to support them. So, you know, I think Grug was very tactful in pointing out that this manel might not be the best place to discuss some of the Roe v. Wade stuff. You know, do we get, like, throw some names at us as like the best experts that you would like to hear from, and maybe we can put something together where it's just them. Maybe we can do something special on that front. We want to make sure that like we're covering as much as possible, and this is a platform for all of these topics to be dealt with the right way. So do help us. You know, we do this on our off time. Sometimes we coordinate these things 6 hours ahead, which makes it really hard to get guests on board.
Hold on. 6 hours ahead was a really comfortable day because we got the notes doc ahead of time.
Right.
Like we've done this before with.
That's the hard part with guests. Like people don't understand that it's not like we're sitting around planning the best possible manel. We're just sitting around.
You wouldn't think to look at the professional and smooth, completely buttoned down together you know, presentation that we make of it, you would think that there's actually a huge amount of time and effort that goes into this behind the scenes, but Like,
I mean,
honestly, a lot of this.
What you don't see is the production crew that's all over here with the boom mic above me.
Not now.
Well, on that front, folks, like, do give us some feedback, give us some info, ping any of us.
Should we do another survey?
A like, also give us a subscribe, bang that bell, you know, and if you have a comment, don't do it on Twitch, do it on YouTube, because that's really going to help us with the algorithm.
There's also something I would point out is there's a slightly more open Keybase group called Glassyard. If folks are around, we might want to, you know, expand that a little bit. Ping some.
I'll set up a form for people to apply, or I guess is not the right word, but
yeah. Well,
to be judged by a panel of your peers.
There will be some mild vetting, but very mild. But yeah, you know, let's. I think this is me attempting to catch a breath and make sure that we're doing things the right way.
You're just trying to like duck out. That's what you're trying to do.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. I'm surprised people are not tired of my shit yet, but like at the time, you know, we are working with our audience, and like I love how many people show up and do great things here and participate. So, you know, this is a symbiotic relationship. Like, let us know what you like, and you know, we'll do our best to provide some.
And we will absolutely fire Jags if that's what you want. You know,
I mean,
we've spoken.
It is what it is. Totally self-serving.
We can take a vote on it. Literally, a voting booth just arrived in front of my house from FedEx. That's about it.
I love it. Let us know how much data was left.
Yeah.
I'm going to be totally self-serving and put the link for LabsCon in the chat. Please, the CFP is open. You have about a month and a half. Please submit to our new conference. It's going to be fucking sweet. It's only for researchers and some choice journalists, but mostly researchers. So do send us some good talks. It's going to be very small, so I can't promise everyone invites like later on and stuff, but all speakers, of course, very much welcome and appreciated. So chat, you know, links there. There's some nice videos in there. We'll do some follow-ups on Twitters, and thanks everybody for you know, continuing to deal with our nonsense. We appreciate all of you. So on that,
Going up as always.
All right.
take care, everybody. Thank you.